we remember this month, Congress was able to finally push beyond its own inertia, and we were able to do what we had not been able to do in 30 years. 30 years. We passed bipartisan gun safety legislation that took a first step toward preventing more gun violence tragedies, including by investing in mental health for our youth and tightening our background check system. But now, after all of the tragedies that we've seen in recent weeks and months, Congress has yet to start a serious bipartisan, bicameral conversation about the next step. What we did last summer was important, it was significant, but it was the first step. The question today is, what's the next step? What is the work that we must do? Here's what's clear. Here's what we know. We cannot wait another 30 years. We can't wait another 30 years for Congress to pass meaningful, common sense gun safety legislation. And we can't wait for the next headline, the next tragic flashpoint. Because there is a profound way in which these tragedies are happening every single day. And it's become so much a part of the routine in America that they don't all make the headlines. According to the Gun Violence Archive that tracks this crisis, there have already been more than 16,000 gun-related deaths in our country so far this year. And we're not just talking about mass shootings. They may not always grab the headlines, but there's intimate partner violence, suicides, other gun violence that are just as pernicious in our country. In fact, all of us have seen this come a little bit too close to home. As a pastor, I presided over the funerals. And then last week, just as I was in the office of the majority leader pushing us to do more, to say more on gun violence, I went back to my office. And about an hour or so later, there was an active shooter situation in Atlanta, which left my own 2 elementary school-age children under lockdown. I wondered if my 6-year-old daughter knew what was happening, and so I just casually asked her, "What happened in school today, honey?" She said, "Dad, today there was a bad man shooting, and we had to go on lockdown." I remember my dad asking me, "Son, what happened in school today?" Never did I have to say to my dad or my mom, "There was a bad man shooting." What trauma are we visiting upon our children when we tell them that the best we can do is to tell them how to hide when this happens? These kinds of drills are as routine as math and reading. So we have a moral urgency to address this issue. All of us remember that Dr. King was a victim of gun violence. Not many Americans remember that in 1974, so was his mother. One Sunday morning at the Ebenezer Baptist Church where I serve, as she was on the organ playing the Lord's Prayer, Alberta Williams King, mother of Martin Luther King Jr., was shot and killed by a young teenager who had access to a gun but not access to the mental health care that he needed. He killed her and a deacon. This was before the automatic weapons that we're now seeing on our streets. Would have been a whole lot more carnage were that to happen today. And so I feel a deep sense of moral urgency. We all have a moral obligation not to turn away. Across the country outside of Washington, there is widespread agreement that Congress needs to enact common sense gun safety solutions. For instance, according to Fox News, 87% of Americans believe that we ought to have universal background checks. Just as one example of the type of solutions most Americans on the left and the right want to see. And still we can't even get that done. That means that there's something deeply broken in our democracy, and we've come today to be part of that solution. And so thank you so very much for coming, even as we deal with a lot of issues here in Washington, including the looming debt default and other political issues take center stage in D.C. We cannot rest. Our children are counting on us to keep them alive. And children shouldn't have to say, as my 6-year-old daughter said to me just a few days ago, "Daddy, today there was a bad man shooting." That should not be a commonplace experience in American life. So thank you so very much. And now it's my honor to hand things over to a lawmaker who, in a real sense, translated her pain into power, and we're grateful for her voice, Lucy McBath.
Well, first I want to say thank you to you, Senator Warnock. Thank you so much for keeping this issue of gun safety on the forefront here on the Hill, here in the spaces and places where we, Congress, have the ability to truly make a difference for our communities and save lives. And I also want to thank all of the organizations that and all of the victims and all of the advocates and all of the moms and the dads and the aunts and the uncles and the sisters and the brothers and the clergy that are out here beating the pavement every single day to make sure that we can live in freedom from unnecessary gun violence. Thank you. Parents in Uvalde have been learning to live without their children for almost a year now. And of course today, you know, this is a very difficult milestone for many people that are joining us today. And families in Buffalo have survived 365 days without their loved ones. I know what they're feeling. I know exactly how they feel. And the first year is always the most difficult. It's always the hardest. It's every day that we live in the immensity of our heartbreak. And our anguish feels eternal. It feels as if we're never, ever going to be able to overcome the deep sadness and the anger and the devastation of losing our loved ones. Will we ever feel happy again? Should we ever feel happy again? Should we feel as if we are able to move on? Do we feel guilty about moving on in our lives without our loved ones? After my son Jordan was murdered by a man with hate in his heart, I cried out to God in my grief, as many survivors do. Why did this happen to my child? And why did this happen to my family? These are questions that we ask every single day of our lives. I thought I had done everything right as a mother, but still, yet my worst fears became real. And it can be hard to explain the love that we have for our children. It's a helpless love. It's an all-consuming love, a love that is so strong that we can be filled with the fear that comes of it, the fear that one day they may no longer be with us. So when we get the phone call that confirms that very fear, that singular fear, it's like a sucker punch to our stomachs, to our souls. It's the desperation that leaves you fighting just to be able to breathe. It's a grief in your heart, and it's just a profound sorrow in your soul. To the survivors that are watching this, for the first time in a decade, I didn't cry on Mother's Day. It's been 10 years now, and for the first time, I didn't cry. However, I know that your grief feels immense. But you carry on the legacy of your loved ones with the work that you're doing every single day. You carry them in your heart and your spirit as you turn your pain into progress. These people behind me, they have made a difference. And they will move forward. And they will continue to make a difference. And together we will win this fight to save the lives of our loved ones. And to all those on this hill who stand in the way of these families, who doubt these mothers, these fathers, these young people on a mission, and block our path towards progress, I say woe to you. We will win this fight to live in our communities in freedom. The freedom to go about our day and not be gunned down in our malls, in our churches, and in our schools. Every day our children are being made orphans. Our wives, widowers, and communities are completely being ripped apart. Thoughts and prayers are not stopping this carnage. And if that's all that my colleagues have to offer to these survivors that we have every single day, I suggest that you save your strength, because faith without works is dead. Prayers without action is hollow. We must continue to follow a path to action. We have the tools to dam this river of despair. It's common sense solutions that save lives. It's background checks. It's red flag laws. It's banning assault weapons. Our nation is under siege, and our defense lies in our courage to act. So let's work harder and be an answer to someone else's prayer. Let's work to heal our land from unnecessary gun violence. Together, I know that we will end gun violence, and we can live freely in our communities and in our lives the way God intended us to live.
Thank you so very much, Congresswoman McBath. And now another among us who has been such an incredible leader on this issue, Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut.
Well, thank you, Senator Warnock. Thanks to my colleagues. Thanks to the advocates that are here today. Amongst my great friends and partners in Hartford, Connecticut, the city in which I live, are Pastor Sam Saylor and Janet Rice. I got to know both of them because when I first got elected to the Senate, they wanted me to know the story of their son. Their son died in the south end of Hartford just months before Sandy Hook, 20 years old, the 20th victim of gun violence that year. It was just a simple argument between him and a young man he was selling a car to that erupted into violence, gunfire, and Shane Oliver, 20 years old, was dead. Shane left a 2-year-old daughter. Both Sam and Janet devoted their lives after that to trying to stop gun violence in the city. Janet became one of the first responders in the city that answers the call when there's a shooting. Her job was to rush to the emergency room when something awful had happened to try to interrupt that cycle. A few weeks ago, Janet got one of those calls. She was on her way to the hospital to meet the families of a mass shooting. 4 people had been shot in that city when she got another call from her supervisor, told her to pull over, told her that one of those victims at the hospital was Shane's daughter, her granddaughter. Her granddaughter didn't make it through the night, and just a week ago I sat with Sam and Janet at their second funeral in 10 years, one for their son and then for their son's daughter. This country is obsessed, rightly so, with mass shootings, with what's happening in our schools and in our churches and in our shopping malls, but every single day, right, that pain is being visited upon thousands, tens of thousands of families all across this country. It doesn't matter whether your child's murder makes the cable news or not. The pain is the same. And our mission as a movement is to make sure that this debate happens every single day in this country, not just the days after there have been these cataclysmic events. And I want to just bring you some hope and some joy about your participation in this movement, right? The first thing to say is this: it's not as if we don't know what works, right? There's some big problems in this country in which we're still searching for solutions. On the epidemic of gun violence, we know what works because in Alabama, they have a rate of gun violence that is not twice as high as Connecticut, not 3 times as high, 4 times as high as Connecticut. Because in Connecticut, we've invested in laws that make our citizens safer. We have universal background checks. We don't allow you to buy and own assault weapons. We still have a ways to go, given what happened in Hartford, Connecticut just last weekend. But we know, based on states that have done the right thing, what happens when you tighten your gun laws. And here's the second reason for hope. We're winning. We used to lose all the time as a movement, right? But after 30 years of inaction, we broke the back of the gun lobby last year here in Washington, D.C. And I am absolutely convinced that we are entering a decade of action, right, where we win consistently on behalf of the 80-90% of Americans that want change. At the state level, we're winning. We're flipping legislatures based upon candidates' belief in gun violence measures. We're getting Republican states to start having conversations about moving laws forward. The reason why I'm so excited to be here with Reverend Warnock is because he is one of the great civil rights leaders in this country. And I view this movement just like the civil rights movement, right? This is a great social change movement. And the one thing that we know about great social change movements is that they win. But the second thing we know about them is that they take time, right? That there are failures, that there are heartbreaks along the way. But if you are so convinced of the righteousness of your cause, as was the civil rights movement, then victory is there. And we are now a movement that is stronger than ever before, that is winning. We know what to do. We know what saves people's lives. And we are going to insist that this year, next year, if we don't convince Republicans to come along and vote with us, then we're not going to wait for them. We're going to take votes. We're going to show people where their representatives stand. But in the end, that's all in service of changing the laws of this country to keep our kids and our communities safer. Thank you, Reverend Warnock, for convening this.
Thank you so very much, Senator Murphy. And now one who has transformed his work from agitator to legislator, but he's still an agitator, Congressman Frost.
Hello, everybody. It is an honor to stand before you today. I'm Congressman Maxwell A Frost, proudly representing my hometown of Central Florida, Florida's 10th Congressional District here in the House of Representatives. And you know, it was about a month ago I was at a vigil in Orlando for a shooting that happened. We had a 9-year-old girl who was killed while sitting on her bed at home. A news anchor who was killed while reporting on that shooting by the same shooter. And at that vigil, the night before, I wanted to see how many vigils I had been to throughout my last 10 years of advocacy. I got involved in politics at 15 because of gun violence. Through looking at pictures and old texts, I was able to get to the number of 60. 60 vigils that I've been to since the age of 15. And those are the ones that I could count because of senseless gun violence. You know, as the youngest member of Congress, I often get asked why I'm in this fight, and my story is pretty simple. I got involved in politics because I didn't want to get shot in school. And I remember the day specifically. I went to an arts middle school and high school. Before every concert, I was a jazz drummer. I am a jazz drummer. My best friends and I would go to a Fridays across the street, load up on a ton of junk food. We were on that 2 for $20. And I remember we're sitting there eating, and there was a silence that fell across the entire restaurant. We looked around, we looked at each other, confused, and we finally looked at the television screens and saw somebody walked into an elementary school in Newtown, Connecticut, murdered 20 children and 6 teachers. I remember going to the show that night. I couldn't play correctly. I kept playing wrong. I kept looking over my shoulders at the exit signs. wondering if a shooter would come into that auditorium and deliver the same fate to my classmates and our families. And that feeling was a feeling I couldn't describe because it was my call to action. And it pushed me to come here for the first time at 15 years old to the vigil for all victims of gun violence that the Newtown Action Alliance hosted. And it was there, I remember the night specifically right after the vigil. It was all of the students associated with Sandy Hook and Newtown sitting around a pool of a hotel over in Virginia. We were kind of wading our feet in the water, and then there's little Maxwell Frost from Florida. And across from me was a guy named Matthew Soto. His sister Vicky was a teacher at Sandy Hook. When she heard the gunshots, she hid the kids in cabinets and in the closet to save their lives, and she was killed. And seeing a 16-year-old with the demeanor of a 60-year-old crying over his sister who was murdered for just doing her damn job changed my life forever. I remember going straight to my hotel room. I called my mom crying. She's a teacher of 37 years. And I said, for the rest of my life, I want to fight for a world where people don't have to feel the pain I saw in Matthew's eyes. 10 years later, we've seen one piece of federal legislation pass. And still, we live in a country where we lose 100 lives a day due to gun violence. Kids waking up every morning with this reality. You know, I'm often asked, what is Gen Z about? What it represents Gen Z? Unfortunately, we are the mass shooting generation. We are a generation that goes through more school shooting active shooter drills, than fire drills. And that is the reality. But we're also a generation that has had enough. And we're also a generation that's going to continue to fight for the world that we believe in. Because I come in here in Congress and I take votes. I remember this party, the Republican Party, brought up a vote on a parental bill of rights, saying it's to protect kids. In my home state of Florida, they're banning books, banning drag queens to protect kids. And my question is this: in a country where the leading cause of death for a child is to be shot to death, why are you doing nothing to end gun violence? Why are you not even having the conversation? And then one of my colleagues has the audacity to get in front of a camera right after a shooting that happened in his own state and say there's nothing we can do. I reject that. I reject that. We were sent here to work. We were sent here for solutions. And what we see now is this issue boils down to a gun lobby that prefers and prioritizes its profits over human lives. And we're here to say people over profits. People over profits over every issue, in every issue. And so whether you're from Nashville, Atlanta, Louisville, Orlando, all communities are devastated by gun violence. And I believe that it is a policy failure that we lose 100 lives a day. I think it's a policy failure that over 350 people will be shot a day due to gun violence. I think it's a policy failure that kids go to school not knowing if they're going to be able to go home. And I think the largest mass shooting that we have is the shootings that happens every day in our black and brown communities across this entire country. It is a failure that oftentimes folks from those communities, people of color, have to scream and yell for people to understand the pain that's going on. That is why we're here to do this work. We won't let anybody forget. And as an organizer, I believe our greatest asset is our story. And so we'll continue to share our stories. We'll continue to fight for the world that we believe in. We'll continue to fight for true freedom, because that's the world that we deserve. That's the world that we deserve. And we're not going to stop until we have a world where we don't have to fear senseless gun violence. I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept. Angela Davis said that years ago, and it holds true today. And we will continue to fight for that world that we need. We need action now. No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace! Let's keep it going. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Congressman. And now, Ashby Beasley, as we hear from others who have experienced this firsthand.
Good afternoon. My name is Ashby Beasley. My son and I are mass shooting survivors, became mass shooting survivors after a man opened fire with an AR-15 style weapon on parade goers in Highland Park, Illinois, killing 7 and injuring over 48 others. I could share statistics and facts with you about assault weapons, but instead I want to ask all of you to think back to when you were 6 years old. Remember those summer days, the carefreeness, the hot summer sun, all the kids playing until dark? Think about the 4th of July, the American flags flickering in the wind and the energy and the excitement, the grill sizzling while you ran through the sprinklers to cut the heat. I want you to think about your hometown Independence Day parade and the search for the perfect spot with the best view. I want you to think of the sounds of the marching band, the beat of the drums amid all the smiles and the waving hands. I want you to remember those days, what those days were like when those moments were so big and so magical. And now I want you to think about being 6 years old and hearing shots from an assault weapon ring out at that parade. I want you to imagine the panic and chaos, people running in every direction. Think about your mom grabbing your arm while you scream over and over again, "What's happening? What's happening?" Imagine hearing someone shout, "The shooter is coming." You're 6, but you know what that means. Your heart races as you feel like at any moment you could be shot. You see grown-ups wailing uncontrollably. You see people tripping and falling. Some have blood on them. Imagine being 6 years old and just giving up. The fear is too much. You don't think you're going to make it, so you lay down on the ground and beg not to die while people run around you and your mom pleads with you to get up. You get up, and when you're finally safe, you scream until your body gives out and you collapse. These events happened to my 6-year-old son last year on July 4th. Now I want you to think of how a 6-year-old should move on from this. Because every day we expect kids to move past experiences with gun violence. We expect them to go back to schools that have been put through lockdown. We expect them to go back to learning in classrooms where they have piled up desks to barricade doors. We expect kids to go on with life after surviving mass shootings, after seeing their friends and teachers murdered. We expect them to go back to being kids after getting shot. We, the adults, are failing our children. It's time for us to stop normalizing mass shootings by putting our kids through lockdown drills and militarizing our schools instead of banning weapons of war. Enough is enough. It's time for Congress to hear us and act by calling a vote for the assault weapon ban so the American people can see who is with us in this fight and who is not. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. And now Elia Eastman.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry. My name is Elia Eastman, and I'm a youth organizer and co-founder of Brady's Team Enough. And I'm so grateful to be here with Senator Warnock and all of you all today. I'm a survivor of unimaginable but preventable gun violence. In 2018, I survived the deadliest high school shooting in American history when a gunman attacked my high school, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, in Parkland, Florida. The perpetrator went on to murder 14 of my schoolmates and 3 of our administrators, and injuring 17 others. I was in the 3rd classroom attacked by the gunman. I am only alive today because of Nicholas Doret, who in death protected me from bullets as they shattered our classroom laptops, windows, and books, tearing through the skin of 6 students in classroom 1214, 4 of which live with permanent physical scars of that day for the rest of their lives. At the age of 16, I had to witness 2 of my classmates die that day, and I had to hide beneath one as they laid lifeless on our classroom tile floor. In the years since my classmates were murdered, there have been over 18 mass shootings at K through 12 schools. Today, we are approaching the 1st anniversary of when 19 students and 2 teachers were killed in an elementary school in Uvalde. Just a month ago, 6 people were gunned down in a school in Nashville. And just yesterday, a young boy right here in Washington, D.C. was gunned down in the parking lot of Roosevelt High School here in D.C. Whether it's 1 student or 17, 1 is too many. Each of these tragedies leaves me asking why. Why, after all this loss and suffering, has there been little action to stop the next shooting from happening? Last year, Congress passed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which is an important step towards ending this epidemic. Yet, even with this action, we are still held hostage to the carnage of gun violence pervading our schools, movie theaters, concert venues, places of worship, and homes. Gun violence is a complex issue, and it cannot be solved with one piece of legislation. Solving a multifaceted problem requires multifaceted solutions, and so much has been left unaddressed. Violence is not inevitable, and there are things the people in that building can do to protect us. They can answer the pleas of children, parents, healthcare workers, and teachers, and the majority of Americans who take action on the issue of gun violence. The majority of Americans want to see stronger background checks, extreme risk laws, effective community violence intervention programs, and an assault weapons ban. So when are we going to get more than thoughts and prayers? How much more loss and pain can be inflicted upon my generation and future generations before lawmakers are finally as fed up as we are? Enough is enough. America needs sweeping action. The longer these lawmakers wait, the longer children will have to worry about being gunned down in this country. Don't force America's children to live in fear. Their happiness and safety should not come second to guns. I join Senator Warnock and his colleagues and my fellow survivors and all those affected by gun violence when I say take action to protect us and not your guns before you end up joining a club that nobody wants to be a part of. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now Jacoby Mitchell. Where's Jacoby? There he is.
Hello, I'm Jacoby Mitchell, and I'm from Charleston, South Carolina, and I am a gun violence survivor. Thank you so much to Senator Warnock for having me, and thank you for everyone being here today. I was 9 years old when my siblings and I experienced my mom getting shot outside of our house in South Carolina, just 2 days before my brother's birthday. We were young. We didn't understand that we were gun violence survivor. We heard the gunshot. We saw the blood. We felt the screams flying out of us. Thankfully, my mom survived, but those sounds, they never really leave you. They just get quieter. Even as you start to heal, you can't truly erase the pain. You only learn how to move through it. I'm in a place where it hurts less, but the state of our gun violence in this country, it doesn't take me back at all. Monterey Park, Half Moon Bay, Oakland, Nashville, Louisville, Allen, communities that this year alone are now forever bearing the scars of our gun violence epidemic. And sadly, they represent only a fraction of gun violence around the country every single day. Every hour, more families, friends, colleagues, and neighbors in America become survivors of gun violence. It's been 10 years since I've been a survivor of gun violence. Now I'm a student at Clemson University, learning how to juggle being an adult while also studying and working. I've found my own healing through joy, but I've also learned the importance of using my voice, calling for change as a student with Students Demand Action. We need common sense gun safety legislation like background checks on all gun sales, red flag laws, and to reinstate the bipartisan assault weapon ban. We need to fully fund evidence-informed community violence intervention programs that are provided to reduce the daily gun violence in our communities, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosive, federal law enforcement agency that cracks down on gun trafficking and gun dealers. And our nation has to start holding the gun industry accountable for the reckless decisions that they are making to us. We saw Congress come together with Senator Warnock's leadership after the tragedies last summer to take action. I'm here to call them again to put aside partisan difference and found a common ground. For me, for my mom, for my community, and for everyone in the world. We deserve to be safe in our communities. We deserve to grow up and grow old. We deserve to be free from gun violence in this world that we are living in. This has to stop. We have to take action. We have to demand change right here and right now. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Last but not least, and then we'll take some questions from our friends in the media, Claudia Fruen.
Hi, thanks for having me today. My name is Claudia Fruen. I'm a gun safety advocate with Giffords. I'm also a pediatrician, mother, grandmother, and a responsible gun owner. I now call Atlanta, Georgia my home. It is where 2 out of my 5 grandchildren currently live. But before moving to Atlanta, I lived in Utah, where I practiced as a pediatrician and raised my 2 sons. For me, like many, it was a Sandy Hook massacre in 2012 that became my call to action, and I've spent the last 10 years of my life trying to help pass laws that are known to decrease the risk of children dying or being injured by a firearm. With the help of 2 mothers, I started a safe gun storage campaign in Utah. There, we knew our message needed to be non-confrontational, since owning a firearm was a way of life for so many families. We called the campaign Bulletproof Kids, and this became our mission statement. Owning a gun is a right, protecting children is a responsibility, prevent youth suicide and accidental injury, store your gun safely. We developed a website, billboards, videos, we gave out gun locks. We developed materials to be used for safe storage counseling. Some of our partners actually included law enforcement, gun shops, and a gun safe manufacturer. But what this campaign actually taught me was education on secure storage is good and it's necessary, but it's not enough. Kids are still dying, so unfortunately my efforts are not over. As you've heard time and time again now, the leading cause of death for children in the U.S. is firearms. It's not car accidents. It's not infectious diseases, not cancers or drowning, but dying from a bullet. Gun deaths among children and teens are also increasing, in fact, up 50% from 2019 through 2021. And more children die from gunfire than police officers every year. It does not make sense that we protect our children in cars and on bikes. We vaccinate them. We give them swimming lessons. We block stairs. We lock up medications, but we do not consistently protect them from guns. That is unacceptable. Rather than prioritizing solutions such as laws to decrease gun violence, we focus our efforts on preparing for mass shootings, making them a normal, inevitable part of our lives. Children in classrooms are taught to hide and to run and to fight. They're educated with Stop the Bleed classes, and they train for active shooter drills through lockdowns. These efforts actually expose our kids to trauma, stress, and anxiety, and they are not the solutions we need to end gun violence. Mass shootings don't need to happen. They are preventable. So we often hear that gun violence epidemic is secondary to mental health issues, but I counter that the gun violence epidemic is fueling mental health issues. Because we fail to pass safer gun laws, anxiety and depression are at an all-time high, and more children are suffering and dying. We need our elected officials to prioritize the safety and well-being of our children, doing everything in their power to save children's lives from gun violence. This can also be done with common sense solutions that are supported by the majority of gun owners. I am a responsible gun owner, and I will continue to fight for safer gun laws until all gun owners are held responsible and children stop dying. Thank you.
Well, thank you so very much. It's great to hear from these voices. I'm grateful for others who joined us, including members of the clergy. Thank you for your witness. The message is clear today that gun violence is not the cost of freedom. This is not the cost of freedom. This is the cost of blind obstinance. This is the cost of demagoguery from those who would say that as we offer common sense gun safety laws, we want to get rid of everybody's guns. This is the cost of greed, and it's totally avoidable. And so we're grateful for those who've joined us, and we will entertain questions from the press.
Obviously, you'll need Republican support to get any sort of bills passed. Have you had conversations with your Republican colleagues? And if not, how do you bring them to the table? Because it seems like there's this really fundamental divide on what to do with gun control.
Well, I think there was a sense last summer that there was a fundamental divide that we'd witnessed for 30 years. And there was a moment when we were able to get bipartisan legislation passed. We did it last summer. There's no reason why we can't do it again. So I'm having those conversations right now with any of my colleagues, all of them. And we have work to do, but the beginning of that work is to actually have an honest conversation, which I can tell you was not happening a few weeks ago. In the wake of what we saw in Nashville with the slaying of the youngest of children, other tragedies, a national conversation, people on both sides of the aisle very concerned about it. We weren't even talking about it a couple weeks ago in Congress. And so I began to urge this issue along with others of my colleagues, and we'll keep pushing until we get something done. But we need a bipartisan solution, absolutely.
And then we're going to finish things off with Gray TV. Do you have a question?
Yeah, just a question for one of the survivors. I mean, how hopeful are you that actually happen this year, given the accident you're seeing here now?
That might be your answer.
These are the folks who have been on the battlefield when it felt like no one was listening. Yes. And you never know when that moment is going to come. And so the importance of this moment is that we keep the conversation going and that we keep the lives and the experiences of ordinary people centered in the conversation. If we center the people rather than the politics, we have a chance of getting it done. Thanks, everybody.
I want to take just a couple of quick group pictures, if that's all right. Get in real close with each other.
All right.
That's when you say things like grapes, bunch up.
What you said? All right.
I love that stove, Pastor.
Thank you.
Actually, delay just a bit so we can get.
No, I know.
All right. 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3. Stay right there in case anybody else is hitting them. And we're good. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So good to see you. Yeah, I saw you sitting there. I was going to say hi.
Oh,
Good. I'm good. Good to see you. Yeah, it's a gorgeous day. It's Claudia. She's working. Oh, here. Yeah, no, Tiffany used to work at different. Oh, yeah, I used to work at Ben. Oh,
I know, and I used to work on community violence initiative work, so I just never teaching about violence. Instead of gun violence, like I work do trauma, child trauma work. So when you said the work that you get in Utah, I was like, oh, that's very interesting. Yeah. It's still going on now?
I know, it's not, I mean, I think the message is still there, the website is still there, but I took my funding and
Okay, well, good luck. Oh, sorry.
no, but it just, I mean, again, it started 10 years ago.
Where's Kathleen?
I didn't feel like it was a good approach, but I stepped over to the other side instead of